good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Microsoft and Infotechtion webinar on data privacy. I'm Catherine Rooks from the Security Business Partner Development team here in EMEA, and I'll be your host today. Before we start, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items with you, please. Throughout the webinar, please ask your questions in the chat window, and we will discuss them during the Q&A portion at the end. Also, please adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct that will be posted in the chat window, and be sure to complete a short survey towards the end to provide your feedback, please. Speaking today from Infotechtion, we have Atli and Vivek with Maha from Microsoft, and we're also delighted to be joined by Laura and Kay from the Food Standards Agency, who will talk about some of the privacy challenges organizations face. Indeed, as we fast approach 2023, we're also nearing International Privacy Day. The webinar should be about 60 minutes in length, and the recording will be shared with you in about a week's time. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I'll now turn over to Atli from Infotechtion to get us started. Thank you, Atli.
Thank you, and nice to be here. So I just want to explain a little bit of who we are and then also talk about privacy and protection. So Infotechtion is a consulting firm specializing in how to best manage, protect information in the Microsoft Cloud and beyond. And we are quite one of the leading experts on this, since we also already have implemented better governance, better protection at many large global companies. So currently we have offices in a number of countries and more starting soon. We also work very close with Microsoft, not only here, but also engineering in Redmond and on different partner initiatives. That's everything from being a compliance partner advisory council, being a security management elite partner program, and so on. So perhaps if you go to the next slide, what I also want to show is a little bit just the approach we take, because we really help customers improve how information and data is managed by one, starting from the left, establish a strategy and plan based on the priorities, the risk, and basically getting to know your requirements, but also your current data. So that includes using tools like Microsoft Compliance Manager, Priva Privacy Risk Insight to establish a current state score. And based on this, we established a blueprint for retain and protect, prevent data loss, and how to deal with investigations, manage insider risk, and value leak. And this blueprint defines the best architecture as the foundation for automation, because we believe that governance and protection must be automated to the extent possible to achieve a zero trust, not rely on users, the people in the business, manually doing the right thing all the time. And for retain and protect, this includes then retention policies, records management to ensure keep what we need, but delete the rest. But also things like sensitivity labels to ensure sensitive information is classified and protected. While prevent data loss ensures that important information or sensitive information cannot be accessible by unauthorized parties. But let me go in and set the scene for what's coming in the rest of the webinar. So if you go to the next one, because people's privacy rights. And actually, if you go back, I think around 1950, the European Convention of Human Rights stated that everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home and his correspondence. And from this basis, the European Union and others sought to ensure that the protection of this right through the legislations like the GDPR. And personal data is then any information that relates to an individual who can be directly or indirectly identified. So that could be, for example, names, email addresses, and obviously then personal data, but also location information, ethnicity, gender, biometric data, religious belief, web cookies, opinions, can also be personal data. And for personal data, you have the right to be informed, have access, make changes, request deletion, restrict processing, and so on. And that's what we're going to cover here in a little bit more detail. But we're also going to take and talk about, if you go to the next slide, the data protection principles. How do we ensure that we then manage personal information as best as required? And in GDPR, I think it's Article 5.12, it basically gives these principles that about lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Processing must be lawful, fair, and transparent to us. A purpose limitation must process data for the legitimate purpose specified. for our information, but also things like data minimization, that we only collect and process the data required for the purpose, and accuracy. Another important thing is the limitation, storage limitation, that they only store personal identifiable information as long as required. So that means that keeping copies of CVs and all that stuff from people in the past that's no longer here, that's a problem. But also integrity, confidentiality, and accountability, that we are, how to say, responsible for ensuring that we can demonstrate compliance with all of these principles. So this sets the scene with a little bit what are the requirements that we have to fulfill. And let's now talk about, okay, so how do we do this and what are the challenges? And for that, I'm really delighted to hand over to Kay and Laura from the Food Standards Agency.
Thanks so much. And thanks for having us here today. It's a really pleasure to speak with you all. So my name's Kay. Those of you who don't know who we are, we're a non-ministerial government department in the UK government, and we are responsible for protecting public health in relation to food in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So between us, Laura and I have got over 15 years combined experience in the KIM space, so hopefully we do know what we're talking about. I'll just set the scene a little bit in where we are in our organisation with what we were just discussing. We, over the last sort of year or so, were migrating from our old EDRMS into a SharePoint structure. So we're starting to move towards a space where we're starting to automate some of these things. We have a lot of different team sites at the moment, so people aren't always clear to save their content. We did a lot of work with Infotechtion in setting up retention labels. So we've started to move towards a space where people have retention labels in place, and that's automated, so people, provided they save their content into the correct place, retention is in place, so we're not saving our content for too long, we're not saving it for too short a period of time either, hopefully. So we've got the right information in the right space, being saved for the right amount of time, hopefully. But as previously mentioned, there are a lot of different sites, and because we migrated from an old site into a new structure, people were just quite keen to save things from essentially what was a burning platform. And at the same time, as we'd rolled out Teams as a replacement to Skype, which was being removed, we'd done that almost a bit, what's the word? We'd done it kind of gradually, and it had grown a bit organically. So some people had got a SharePoint structure which had been designed, and some people have got something which had sort of grown. So we've moved into a space where we'd work with Infotechtion to try and make it a bit more designed rather than a gradual grown thing. So we're getting our records management under control, and we've got a project ongoing still to try and finish sort of tightening that up. Retention has been designed. We haven't finished implementing it yet, but I think we're in a position where we have the space to be in a more confident space with our records management. What we haven't really explored is any of the further privacy things that Microsoft can offer, which is what we were just talking about before. So there are some privacy challenges in place, which I think is what Laura was going to talk about in a bit more detail. If you're ready to speak, Laura.
I am, yeah. So from an information governance perspective, I think some of the key challenges are around humans, human error, human storage, a human ability to place things in a place that's more convenient for them than it is in line with the policy. And then being able to locate those things and know of their existence is a little bit of a struggle for us, particularly in terms of things like subject access requests. How can you be absolutely sure that you are adhering to someone's right to have all of their information about them when actually you've got no idea whether the person has put it in the right place, or if it's, you know, whether they are failing to give it to you, or any other variety thereof. And, you know, we do training, we offer, you know, a very comprehensive service to try to mitigate those risks and advice and policy, but there's only so far you can go with regard to, you know, not fully appreciating the entirety of all of the information that you actually even hold. And as Kay says, we've done a lot of work on that with regard to shifting from our previous system to SharePoint and trying to, that forces an archiving process and a cataloging in some senses. But I think that's one of the key issues and privacy areas for us, is just the risk around not fully understanding what we can access. And I think that's true of most kind of organizations in a new GDPR world, trying to transfer into this new system. Kind of from, going back a little bit further, but this new very cloud-based way of working and the impact that it's had on some people more so than others, and particularly more senior staff and older people within an organization, how they are not as au fait or understanding of the new systems and technology much of the time, and they don't necessarily understand the challenges that we face in managing this, because it's not something that they were kind of reared on. Therefore, I think that can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge to try and illustrate that as well, and frame it in we understand, the importance of what we're talking about, and when the thing goes wrong, it can sometimes then be like, well, why didn't you? And I'm like, I did.
Yeah, and one of the other challenges I've heard quite frequently from other customers as well is how the technology kind of supports some of the workflow, such as subject access requests. The biggest concern is security in that process itself, when as part of a subject access request process, information needs to be collected. And the way the technology works, or the way we tend to kind of use a storage space, we inherently end up creating more risk in that process by keeping information in either personal storage spaces to fulfill a particular access request process. And that sometimes becomes quite a concern from a security and risk point of view for privacy officers and privacy teams. As part of that overall workflow, what's the right approach to collect the data, review the data, even redact the data, and then provide that information without creating any additional silos, any additional risks, which then creates additional challenges of how do we actually delete this information because we only use it for a particular workflow. So that's something which, I know Maha is going to talk a little bit later on about how Microsoft, as you mentioned, that a lot of that information is in Microsoft 365, in Teams, in OneDrive, in Exchange Online. So how do you kind of collect that in place, and what does the technology offer to do that collection, do that review, and do that data minimization in place without creating any additional security or privacy risks of keeping and exporting the data into other storage locations? So thank you. I will move on to the next section. So how can technology solve the problem? I'm going to first start with talking about, again, just extending some of these challenges and how do we solve them today? How are organizations solving these challenges today? What is the response of technology to some of these challenges, especially around, it's a big topic about human intervention and human element. So while the technology is not there to fully automate and fully replace the human intervention, but provide enough capabilities so that we as humans who are, using the information and creating the information and fulfilling those requirements are able to do so in line with the organization's privacy policies, privacy guidance, information management standards. So first of all, just a kind of a focus really on why we are even talking about privacy. And there are a number of reasons because of which organizations choose to think about privacy compliance and specific privacy related standards. A lot of those are coming from industry standards, but then also company policies, risk management from a company point of view to address not only the privacy compliance regulations, but also to protect organizational information, data exfiltration scenarios. There's a huge focus on the business requirements in order to be able to process the data for its legitimate purpose. We work with a number of organizations who are working as a single organization in the same space, and sometimes often within the organization are competing with each other. For example, an organization which is a retail but also a bank. And so handling those situations where the privacy compliance related to a customer information, it becomes very, very important for those organizations to manage their internal compliance capabilities. And often we do that is as as Laura and Kay mentioned, that there's a lot of emphasis on guidance, training, do the right thing. And so we tell people, please make sure that you know and identify what data you have, how you want to protect it, and behave responsibly, because that's the company policy. And here is the training that you can take in order to understand what does it mean to behave responsibly. Remove the data that you don't need. We tell our employees, if your information has any personally identifiable information, then make sure you handle it appropriately. So a lot of these are actually guidelines where the burden is actually on the staff or partners or contractors to handle information responsibly, let alone the information which contains personally identifiable information. And how many of those actually do understand what is a personal data, what is not a personal data. So raising the awareness of what constitutes a personal data, how do we manage it effectively, and when does a personal data becomes obsolete or not required so that it can be deleted responsibly. There's a lot of questions for people to answer. And while, yes, of course, managing information and responsibly and behaving accordingly to company policy is absolutely essential, there's something which technology can do there to help reduce that burden. And what Atle mentioned on that same principle of zero trust is to provide enough capabilities, enough policies, enough automation in the system so that you as an organization can demonstrate compliance against those policies, whether those are privacy policies, record management policies, and so on. And yes, of course, in addition to that, people still have to continue to work. But if somebody doesn't take the right action, then the system is able to manage with that. And that's what we mean by zero trust, whether it is a zero trust in context of security, or it is zero trust in context of compliance. It's the same principles which kind of apply. So overall, from a privacy challenge point of view, just thought we'll just put some challenges and some key responses. So the big challenge is, how do you find the information? What privacy content do I need to find? Where would that content be? How do we determine even who has access to it when we are working across SharePoint, Teams? And I don't want to just talk about SharePoint, Teams, and emails. A lot of the customers have their focus on structured applications as well, business applications, customer applications, CRM products, etc., where the real customer data is. So how do we bring that data discovery together when the privacy related concerns are across information which is stored in the form of files and emails, and information is also stored in the form of structured systems, databases. And so we often sort of recommend that we start with the data mapping and discovery across the whole platform. And we will talk a little bit more about how the technology is actually now able to provide the capability, especially on the Microsoft platform, with the ability to create a data map across your entire estate, not just Microsoft 365. You may have information in file shares. You may have information in Azure storage, in data lakes, in AWS, in other applications as such, all of that needs to come under the scope of data mapping and data discovery, especially if that is likely to include personal data. The next challenge is, once I understand what the data discovery is, I now know my business challenges, but how do I deal with requests? I have data access request. I have right to be forgotten request. How do I appropriately size it, and how bigger is the task for me in order to go and collect that information from various systems? So as part of that, the data map and the data discovery, which we implement, forms the absolute baseline and foundation, so that you have, as a starting point, a single place where you can see all your data and a view on that data, which reflects the personal data. It could be about a person, it could be discussions, it could be an information through which you can identify a person. All of that information is collected and presented in a way that it can be anonymized, of course, and the processing of that is legitimate. That's one of the other challenges we are trying to address is, for example, in the UK, the ICO guidance is very, very clear. Even if you are processing personal data to address privacy compliance, you need to have a legitimate purpose for it. You can't just scan the data and store it somewhere and then start processing it if it includes personal data. So we're working sort of within those guidelines to make sure that the processes and the tools we implement have a legitimate purpose and are working towards an outcome towards simplifying privacy compliance, data minimization, and subject access request type of workflows. And then, of course, then how do you act? And that act part could be a reactive in case of a breach, but also as part of responding to a business process. Laura just mentioned about subject access request and how quickly in a timely manner, and what is the cost of implementing that process? What is the human cost? What is the overall cost to responding to a subject access request? How do we measure it? And how can we find ways to not only make it more efficient, but also reliable so that we are able to respond to those access requests? Or maybe any other process. It might be identified expired personal data, and through policies, delete that data because it's no longer required. And as part of that, monitoring and responding to information in real time becomes very, very essential. The collection of information is where we see privacy teams spend a significant amount of time in data collection. So how can technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning can actually help you find the relevant data in context of a process so that you can make informed decisions? Now, again, the use of technology here is not to replace the processes or the activities which we perform today, but to support that decision making where the time which is taken by individuals, privacy teams or privacy officers is reduced and focused on the high value activities as part of that process. So overall, I just want to sort of look at the a very technology focused architecture here. So of course we have Microsoft 365, but that's one part of the story here. Microsoft 365 plus other applications, plus other storage platforms, plus other databases, that forms the sum total of all the information and all the data, which often comes into the scope of subject access request or a right to forget scenario, or even for GDPR compliance. Many organizations actually have not started with GDPR compliance in Microsoft 365. They've started with their applications where they keep customer data, where they keep a loyalty card information in certain scenarios, where they keep marketing information. A lot of that is actually in systems, applications. But of course, it is also in Microsoft 365. So we start the technology, and this is available today through Microsoft Purview, which is now bringing together all the richness of the capabilities in Microsoft 365, plus what's not in Microsoft 365. And through that, we are kind of moving away from bringing everything into Microsoft 365 in order to demonstrate compliance. The information which is suitable for Microsoft 365, it stays in Microsoft 365. We provide the processes, workflows in Microsoft 365 so that you don't have to create copies of information. You don't have to add any more to privacy, security, data compliance risks, that as part of that particular process where you're collecting the data, you're reviewing the data, you are then packaging the data, and then you are responding to a subject access request, that it is all happening in place. And the retention of that information, the deletion of that information is all kind of handled as part of that process. And it isn't an individual responsibility to go and actually think about delete that data once that subject access request is completed. And I'm using subject access request as an example because we're going to focus a little bit more on that. So this approach of Microsoft Purview data map builds a single index. Now, does it cover everything? No, doesn't cover everything right now. But we can see that there are more and more sources which are being added to it. So you can already see that Azure files, there are partner developed connectors as well. For example, Infotechtion has built a similar capability where we are able to bring in to the data map a view of if you are still using network file shares. And while you continue to use those network file shares, we work with customers quite closely to move that information into cloud so that you can get the benefit of all the compliance, protection, records management, and security. But while you are in that process, you still have the responsibility to discover that data, analyze it. So this is where Microsoft Data Map comes into play, provides data classification capabilities. On that data map, you're able to then leverage simple models such as identify sensitive information based on already created templates which Microsoft has provided both in Microsoft 365 and Azure. So we could very easily run our analysis against that data map to identify information which might include things like credit card numbers, just as an example, or CVs, for example. Behind that, because this is in Azure and it is powered by all things in Azure, Infotechtion is working with Microsoft and customers to kind of build more AI-based models, leveraging AI cognitive services. So using AI cognitive services, we are then able to, in addition to the existing templates for credit card numbers, etc., be able to do more analysis to provide more relevant information to you, where it is not just based on keywords or pattern matching, it is based on AI algorithms, which are looking at similar documents. It has been trained on it, and it is going and finding similar documents, data, etc., in the system. And through that, you are then able to apply, some of the things which Kay mentioned, lifecycle management policies, compliance and protection. If the data map identifies information with sensitive information, might not be personal data, but still sensitive from an organization point of view, could be a patent, it could be, annual reports, which people may have kept on other systems, to identify and actually apply specific protection capabilities, like sensitivity labels. So think not just in context of that information, which is in Microsoft 365, but using this capability, you are able to expand that, and using the similar tools and similar capabilities, start to expand that into other systems as well. So that's available right now. What's coming on top of that is then the ability, once you have the data map, we then want to be able to work with that data. And so from a privacy point of view, data sharing controls. Using that data map, you can define sharing controls. For example, in case of, again, subject access request, if that data that you have identified needs to be reviewed by someone, you shouldn't need to create a copy of it. The system and the technology provides you the ability to create sharing control so that you can share that data with someone for that period. And then once the review is completed, the system can remove the access. Data subject access request workflows. Maha is going to talk, I think, a little bit more about it and what technology provides today, what does the experience look like, etc. Right to forget workflows. That's again a very important scenario for us, which we're hearing a lot from the customers. And then data minimization and lifecycle management policies. This is so important that many customers have taken an approach to apply a lifecycle management policy, a retention or a deletion policy to all of their content, that if it is, for example, not modified over 3 years, we want to delete that information because we as an organization do not want to carry the risk that people should do the right thing of deleting that data. So there are many ways to identifying that data, specifically focused on privacy workflows to minimize it. And then, of course, the data lineage throughout the life cycle. How is your data moving from one place to the other, from draft to final, from one system to the other system? We want to be able to provide that entire data lineage across multiple systems, not just within Microsoft 365. And it could be a file which is moving from SharePoint to Teams to OneDrive, or it could be a data sitting in a database, which is following through the same journey, which is a data which is processed for some purposes, but then is also copied into a data lake for dashboarding purposes, etc. So I hope that clarifies how the technology is moving and expanding within Microsoft 365 to provide that integrated experience, but also the specialized and specific workflows which you can use right away to fulfill some of those specific requirements. Just a quick example, I'm going to just quickly run through this in context of subject access request. Just going to build this quickly from a subject access request point of view. You review a request, you set up, you create a case, you perform an initial search, you then review it, you then assign collaborators, then you do a quality assurance review, and then you submit it. That's kind of the standard subject access request process. And many organizations may have variations for it. The challenges we face is, first of all, the privacy team needs to set up a folder structure for a subject access request. Where do we keep the data, where we collect it? A lot of the times we've seen it's either in network file shares or OneDrive. Because the privacy team has concerns, they don't want that data to be accessible beyond the immediate team. When you talk about how the new Priva workflow addresses that and absolutely removes the need for anybody to create any folder structures, because it is able to provide that experience to you in place using the subject access request workflow. The next challenge is, how do we identify contributors? Because it isn't just the privacy team who reviews a subject access request. There are people within the business often who need to come into that process in order to review that. Now, again, as part of that, sharing becomes an issue. How do we share that information if it is stored in OneDrive for business? How do we bring those people in? So simplifying that process on adding collaborators and also being able to tag information which is sensitive and should not be accessible to those collaborators. So selectively sharing information, tagging that information which is required for somebody to review, but not exposing the full extent of that information becomes very important. And that's something which is now supported in Priva as part of the privacy review workflows. And then finally, creating that final response, single PDF, redacting certain information, what to redact in the response. I saw an email in one of those forums where somebody said, does anybody has a list of fields which you would regularly redact as part of the subject access request process? So building that knowledge and information about how do you redact and do you actually create a copy? A lot of the time for redaction, we don't want to redact the original document, but hence we create copies. So how does Priva or privacy tools Microsoft is bringing in helps create that redaction, but at the same time doesn't end up creating more copies for deletion. So establishing a process for exporting the data, a data which is exported and shared, you are now able to associate lifecycle management policies, which behind the scenes links into retention policies and retention labels, etc., so that through one single place, you have a full control on the overall process. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to give the floor to Maha for the demo of some of those capabilities I've talked about. And if there is any time left, we will then take on any more questions.
Thank you, Vivek. Good morning, everyone. So before we start with the demo, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit. We at Microsoft view privacy as a human right. We also recognize that the ubiquitous use of our collaboration technology means that a lot of your data, whether it's personal, business related, intellectual property, whatever the crown jewels are, lives in Office 365. We already offer solutions to support organizations in securing this data and protecting it against malicious or accidental leakage and loss. We now layer on top of that privacy risk protection. I don't need to preach to this audience. Privacy is not a single siloed part of the organization. It's not divorced of security or of business process. On the contrary, it must be embedded into the culture, the behaviors, the processes, and the technology. And that means also embedding it into our existing strategies. And that is the principle on which we developed our solution, Microsoft Priva. It's designed to enhance and complement data security and governance solutions. And it breaks down into two modules. I'm going to walk through them in a demo in just a minute, but there's two modules that we're going to cover. Privacy risk management, which is designed to help uncover risky personal data interactions in the business. And the second module is the subject rights request module, which is designed to help find data subject information that resides within Office 365 across email, SharePoint sites, Teams, chats, channel messages, and OneDrive files as well. So with that in mind, let's start with our privacy risk management module. The first thing organizations need is to be able to discover personal data automatically and efficiently instead of just using surveys and spreadsheets. But discovering that personal data is not enough. We need visibility into the associated risks around that data. And this is where our module for privacy risk management comes in. It helps you identify critical privacy risks that can come up from data overexposure, data hoarding, or even cross-border data transfers. So once these risks are identified, we might still struggle with figuring out what actions we have to take to mitigate these risks. Some organizations might spend a lot of time and resources trying to build APIs that plug into different solutions and systems to address that risk, but it's not very efficient as you're just creating more overhead to manage. And also some of the context that is associated with these risks could be lost when you're trying to integrate. Our solution provides a customizable out-of-the-box template for these different risks, so data overexposure, data hoarding, and data transfers. And once these are deployed in your tenant, you'll be able to identify and detect these risks and alert your privacy admins about the violations so that they can take immediate action. But it's not just visibility that we're providing here. As Laura, Kay, and Vivek have already said, a lot of the challenge is with awareness and education of end users. And it's not that people intentionally want to break the rules, it's that people don't necessarily know when they're doing something that isn't right or when they're mishandling data, because they might have that training once a year, but we don't always retain that information. And so a big focus of this solution is about enabling the information worker to make the right decision and to make the right choice. We're giving them the information to say, hey, there's this file with stale personal data that's been sitting in your OneDrive for over a month. You haven't touched it, and it contains sensitive information. Maybe you want to consider getting rid of that. So it's not left to the privacy admin or the security admin to make that decision. It is up to the information worker to make smart data handling decisions. And let's be real, when it comes to the business, a security admin or a privacy admin is not going to be able to make a decision on, do I still need this list of attendees for this event, or do I still need this marketing list that I was going to send information out to? That's something that the relevant team and the relevant person needs to make a decision on. So what does this look like? The first page that you will land on is our overview page. So when you enable Microsoft Priva, within less than 48 hours, you will start to see insights about personal data that's happening across your tenant in M365 start to load into this overview dashboard. It gives you an idea of what personal data exists in your organization, where it lives, whether it's email, SharePoint, OneDrive, and so on. It will show you, for example, in this tenant, we have 1.7 thousand items with personal data that were found over the past 48 hours. And these insights will get dynamically updated. So as people create more data, interact with more data, that will keep displaying on the dashboard. You will also see several reporting tiles that summarize the 3 privacy risks, or the 3 categories of privacy risks that we're capturing. So data minimization is identifying personal data that's not been used for a long period of time and it's just sitting around in different repositories. Data overexposure risk, which identifies content with that's being shared potentially externally outside the organization. And also cross-border data transfer risk. So if you're a multinational organization and you have locations around the world and you want to be able to capture data transfer across those different locations, perhaps you're using multi-geo, we can capture that. Or if you want to capture movement of data across departments as well, we can also capture that information. And then the data profile gives you that deeper look into the sprawl of your personal data. So where are the locations we retain the majority of that personal data? You can see here I have a lot in Exchange. I also have a lot in SharePoint. OneDrive is a little bit concerning. Should people really be holding on to personal data in their OneDrive accounts? So it gives me this idea about the types of personal data that live in my organization and which locations. Now, out of the box, M365 can recognize more than 200 personal data types. That includes things like full names, physical addresses, IP addresses, even medical and financial information as well. We also have license numbers like driver's licenses, passport numbers across multiple countries and more. So we will be able to identify that, and you can also refine that and define your own. So things like employee IDs or customer IDs as well. And if your tenant is geographically distributed, so if you're using multi-geo, then you can even see which geos hold the biggest amount of personal data in your organization. All these insights require zero configuration. You simply just start the solution and start to see that rich insight load automatically into your tenant, into your Priva dashboard. Now, if I drill down from the data profile page, it gives me a granular view of the content, subject to us having the appropriate permissions, of course. Again, this is a privacy solution. We want to be private. And so we don't want to give permissions to everybody in the organization to be able to see this information. So there's very strict and granular role-based access control. So I can give only the needed level of permission to the people who require it. So they can then filter this data using various pivots that we have built in. Say if we only want to look for data that is open to external access, I can filter on that view. I can also search for specific types of personal data. So maybe I am looking specifically for financial information, or I am looking specifically for full names and addresses. I can search these pivots and narrow these pivots down by the type of personal information that I am looking for. Once these insights into what data is being created and how it moves have popped in, we can also alert our analysts and admins to the potential risks. So it's not just reading the insights and trying to take action based on an insight. We will be able to configure and refine the policies and the alerts that come out of these policies to our admins so that they focus on the most relevant risks and the highest risks. So we're not overloading them with information. We do provide templates out of the box that are designed to monitor for, again, data hoarding, overexposure, and data transfers. So let's say your organization cares about data transfers between the UK and the US only. I don't care about transfer within the EU potentially. I'm fine with that, but I care about transfer of personal data from the UK to the US. Your admin can quickly tune the out-of-the-box template to these specific settings or locations, and then Microsoft Priva will only include or provide alerts to the admins when that specific risk is detected. We can also set up data transfer policies based on departments exchanging data. So for example, blocking data transfer between engineering teams and sales teams so that product telemetry won't be used as a sales lead signal, for example. Once set up, these policies will provide alerts for your admins and privacy analysts when a match or violation is detected. But in each alert, and again, with the right level of permissions, the admin and analyst can easily see the content that triggered the policy. So what was the email, the file, the Teams chat or message that created this policy or violation? And you'll also see personal data highlighted or called out in terms of it was a full name or it was a financial piece of information, so that they can easily understand why this content is flagged. With this visibility, then the analyst or the admin can choose how to remediate. So they might be, taking action against it to say, actually, we're going to retain that file. We know we need it. They might decide to delete the document, or even better, notify the owner. Because again, the analyst or the admin is not necessarily knowledgeable enough about the business and the business need to make a decision on, do I delete this file? Do I retain this file? Is it sensitive, not sensitive? What do I do with it? So we can notify the owners and let them know that we've detected a potential violation. Can they take action? Can they do something about it? So speaking of the file owners, how do we make sure they're aware of the severity of their action or lack of action? Again, privacy is something we need to embed in the behavior of people in the organization. It needs to become the cultural norm. So what does their experience with Priva look like? This is Teams, and we can see that Bob, who's located in the US, is trying to send a personal data message to his colleague Sam in the UK. Since we've already set up a policy to say we don't want this happening, we can see that the transfer gets blocked in Teams in the moment and prevents the data from being transferred outside of the US. In addition to Teams blocking the transfer, Bob will also get this pop-up message that is one, educating him on why he can't do what he's trying to do, but also informing him or giving him the option to override if needed. So we don't want to stop the business. If there is a cause or if there is a need for this information to be transferred, we want that to happen. So Bob can choose to override and provide a business justification for why he decided to override it. This is all captured, it's all auditable, it's all retained within an audit trail. But it's important that, one, we continuously educate our users so this becomes standard behavior. They learn every time they see these messages. We provide them with link within that pop-up message to say, here's some training about the context of this misbehavior if you want to understand more why you shouldn't do it. So we can provide them contextual training in the moment. And this ensures that they are retaining the information. Another example is this end user experience for data overexposure. So again, data overexposure is the case where we might share a file publicly that contains personal information. I might create a public share link from SharePoint or from OneDrive where anybody who clicks on the link can open the file. That's not the best way to handle personal data. So in this case, my data owner receives an email like in an email digest. So if they have multiple files with the same problem, they'll see all of them in one email. So we're reducing that burden for them, but they can directly from within the email take action. So they can choose to keep the file, maybe there is actually a valid reason, or they can choose to trash that file, make it private basically, and say, actually, no, that was a mistake. So if they choose to make it private, that overshared link or that public link will be destroyed and the file cannot be accessed again. So in addition to that remediation recommendation action, we as admins would still be able to provide them with customized training. So again, as part of that digest, I'm giving them customized training specific to that context of risk, specific to that overexposure risk to say, here is why you shouldn't handle this data in this way. Here's the risk you're exposing the organization to and potentially yourself to if you mishandle personal data. And finally, the data minimization experience very similarly gives that email digest view to the end user to give them the option to keep or trash a file. So again, I might be holding files with personal data, personal information in my OneDrive. They've been sitting there for over a month or 2 months. They're stale at this point. They haven't been edited, modified, or used in that period of time. So I'm giving the end user or the information worker or the data owner the option to trash that and get rid of it and reduce the risk that they're exposing the organization to. So these are some of the examples that basically allow end users to interact with the system and learn from that continuous education and continuous insistence on handling appropriately or private data. The second module that we have within Priva is Priva subject rights requests. And Vivek talked about this a little bit. We have built in the solution into the Office 365 environment so that you can process subject rights requests and collect data that lives within Office 365. We can also bring data from other systems, other enterprise solutions that you might have and search that as well. It can be set up with connectors to search to other systems. But in essence, this is searching through your Exchange, so emails, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams for information about a specific data subject. We know that more and more regulations now require organizations to provide their customers and employees with the ability to understand what data you've collected on them. And with a lot of my customers, when responding to these requests, finding data in a structured system is kind of straightforward and easy enough. If you're searching in a database, you search for that column specifically, you search for that record specifically, and you pull in all the relevant data for that record. But searching through unstructured data repositories like a file share or SharePoint Online or email is not as straightforward and is not as easy. And so with Priva, you can now actually automate that search process. So within Priva, you can basically create a data subject access request, include information about who that data subject is. So are they a customer? Are they a current employee or a former employee? What is their name, their nicknames, their employee number or customer number? Provide all this information about who they are and their relationship to your organization. And then also refine the search if you want to search for a specific period of time. If we know this person was an employee only for the past couple of years, I can only search for that time frame. So I can refine my search and retrieve the data. The system will go and basically search through the entirety of Office 365, retrieve data based on your search criteria. So their name was, I don't know, John Smith, for example. They're going to look for John Smith, or maybe Johnny was a nickname they went by. And their employee number was employee 12345. So they're going to look for data related to employee 12345. And if they are a current employee, maybe we don't care about emails they actually created, but we care about conversations that happened around them. So we're going to exclude emails that they actually authored, but we're going to include emails that they haven't. So we perform this search and bring all the data in from the environment. And this is where then we can start to review that data and call that data. Do we share everything that the data subject has requested? Do we need to share all of the data that was retrieved? Maybe some of it is actually intellectual property, and we can't share that. So maybe we'll exclude that from the final data set. Some of it actually is personal information about other people, so we can redact it. There's built-in redaction or annotation in the tool, in the UI. So you don't have to pull the file out from a different location, redact it manually. I actually have customers who still manually redact data and files. But you don't have to do that anymore. You can annotate directly within the interface. So we can do all of our review, bring in collaborators. Again, business needs to make the decision on, is this intellectual property? Is this a file that can be shared? So we can perform all of this interaction, perform all of this search, review, and calling of data within the interface, and finally provide an export to the data subject to give them the ability to basically review what data we have on them, make a decision on, do they want us to retain it? Do they want us to make edits, adjust, or potentially even delete? So this is some of the capability that is built into the platform today. We continue to make updates and enhancements to it as well. We currently have in private preview workflows to enable right to be forgotten as well, keeping in mind we don't want to conflict with retention rules that are already in place to retain some business data as well. So if you are interested, we do have the ability also to integrate with other solutions. So if you already have like a OneTrust or another privacy application that performs your searches across different platforms, maybe it doesn't do as well within Office 365, we can directly integrate with that so you can have one place to perform all your data subject access requests. You are able to trial this today. We have trials available for 90 days for both modules. So if you're interested, please let us know. We'll drop that link in the chat as well for you. Vivek, I'll hand back over to you, or sorry, Catherine.
Thank you, Maha, and thank you, everybody. This concludes our webinar for today. I'd like to share a big thanks to the speakers and also to you, our audience, for listening. If I could please ask you to fill in the short survey that's in the chat window in order to enable us to continuously improve our webinars. And I wish you season's greetings, and I look forward to seeing you in 2023. Many thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.